There are people who come back to the same place every week, and you learn not to ask why. You learn to read the shape of a habit before you understand the reason for it. I've seen enough of both to know the difference between someone who belongs somewhere, and someone who is trying very quietly to become the kind of person who does. This is a story about a man named Silas Croft, and a woman named Nora Baine, and a town library in the middle of the Saskatchewan prairie, that neither of them had any business being in, and yet both of them kept returning to, every Tuesday evening for the better part of a year. The Lakewood Municipal Library was not much to look at. It sat between a farm supply store and a closed-down diner on the main street of a town that had been losing people slowly since the mid-80s. The shelves were crowded and not always logical. The carpet was the color of old mustard. The heating groaned in winter and the air conditioning was unreliable in summer, which in Saskatchewan meant it gave out exactly once a year when you needed it most. Nora Baine had been running it for 6 years. She had come to Lakewood after a divorce and a period of her life she didn't discuss with people she'd known less than a decade. She was 38, precise in the way that some women become precise after years of having had to be, and she had a habit of noticing things she didn't necessarily mean to notice. The tilt of a returned book's spine told her how carefully it had been read. A patron's library card, worn soft at the corner, told her something about the weight of the life in their wallet. She didn't catalog these observations or do anything with them. They simply accumulated, the way everything does in a library, quietly with no particular urgency, until suddenly there is too much of it to ignore. Silas Croft first came in on a Tuesday in October. She remembered the date not because she'd written it down, but because October Tuesdays in Lakewood had a particular quality of gray light through the east-facing windows, and because the bell above the door had a loose fitting that made it ring twice when the wind came from the north, and that evening it rang twice. He was a big man. Not tall in a way that required accommodation, but solid in a way that made him seem slightly too large for interior spaces. He wore a canvas work jacket and boots that had been cleaned but not recently. His hands, when he pulled them from his pockets, were the hands of someone who worked outside. Knuckle-heavy, weathered, with the particular stillness of hands that spent more time gripping things than gesturing. He stood in the entrance for a moment longer than most people did, not looking around the way a newcomer looks around. Looking in a way that seemed more like reassurance. Checking that something was where he expected it to be, or that something he'd feared was not there. Then he walked to the back corner table, the one furthest from the front desk, pulled out a chair and sat down. He didn't take out a book. He didn't approach the shelves. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the surface of it. And after a few minutes he seemed to settle into some private arrangement with himself, and simply stayed there, quietly, until 8 o'clock, when Nora turned off the overhead lights in the rear section to signal closing time. He left without speaking. She thought about it on the drive home, the way you think about a piece of weather that hasn't arrived yet. He came back the following Tuesday, same jacket, same table. He arrived at 6:15 and left at 5 to 8, and this time he had a newspaper with him, folded to the crossword page, which he set on the table in front of him but did not open. Nora noticed this the way she noticed most things. Not obviously, not by staring, but in the accumulated glances of someone who has spent years in a room with people who need not to feel watched. She had developed, over time, a quality of attention that was not surveillance. It was more like peripheral awareness. She knew where everyone was in the library the way a good host knows where everyone is at a party. Not from looking directly, but from some ongoing adjustment of the room in her mind. By the third Tuesday she knew a few things about Silas Croft. She knew he took his coffee black from the vending machine in the town hall across the street, and sometimes brought it in still steaming, which technically violated the library's no beverages policy, which she had technically never enforced. She knew he parked his truck, a dented dark green half-ton, at the far end of the lot. She knew he arrived at almost exactly 6:15 each time, and that this precision did not seem coincidental. She did not yet know that he could not read. She figured it out in late November. It happened because of a woman named Bev Theriot, who came in every other Tuesday for large print novels, and who talked at a volume that suggested she might have forgotten where she was. On this particular evening, Bev had approached the back corner table with an armful of books and asked Silas, in her way, whether the seat across from him was taken. Nora had been shelving returns nearby. She wasn't listening, or hadn't meant to be. Silas had said the seat was free. Bev had sat down and, as she often did with anyone nearby, begun to talk. She talked about a book she had just finished. She slid it across the table toward him and pointed at something on the back cover, asking if he'd heard of the author. Silas looked at where she was pointing, and Nora from 3 shelves away saw it. It was not a dramatic thing. It would not have been visible to most people. It was simply a particular quality of blankness. Not the blankness of disinterest, but the blankness of someone confronted with a text that held no meaning for them. The way the eyes move across words without finding purchase. She had seen it before, years ago, in a literacy outreach program she'd volunteered with in the city. She recognized it the way you recognize a language you once learned and didn't forget. He said something to Bev. She couldn't hear what. Bev laughed and took the book back and went on talking. Silas nodded at appropriate intervals. He was good at that, she noted. Good at the conversation around the reading, at the performance of engagement. That evening, after Bev had left and the library had thinned to a few remaining patrons, Nora went to the reference shelf near the back corner and reshelved a book that did not need reshelving. She did not look at him directly. She did not say anything. She pulled a thin paperback from the display rack on the end of the shelf. A pamphlet really put out by the Provincial Literacy Council, its cover featuring a photograph of a wheat field and the words "reading changes." Everything in a font that was trying too hard to be friendly, and she set it, face down, on the end of the shelf nearest his table. She was not sure why she did it that way, face down. It had been instinct. She didn't want him to feel displayed. Then she went back to the desk. She didn't watch to see what he did with it. That was the rule she had given herself, though she hadn't framed it as a rule at the time. She simply turned her attention elsewhere and kept it there. The following Tuesday he came in at 6:15. Same table. He sat for a while in the ordinary way. Then, at some point in the middle of the evening, she wasn't watching, genuinely wasn't watching. She heard the sound of a chair shifting, and then nothing. And when she glanced up a few minutes later, he was standing at the end of the shelf where she had left the pamphlet. He stood there for a long time. He picked it up, he turned it over, he looked at the cover. She could see from the angle she was at that he was looking at the photograph of the wheat field, not at the words. Then he tucked it inside his jacket, not as a theft but as something private, and came to the desk. "Evening," he said. "Evening," she said. He looked at the surface of the desk for a moment. "The pamphlet on the shelf back there," he said. "The one about." He stopped. Started again. "Is there a program in town?" "There is," she said. She kept her voice at the same register she used for everything. Not warmer than usual. Not careful in a way that would have told him she knew what the question cost him. "Tuesday and Thursday evenings right here in the library. 7 o'clock. He nodded. "It's quiet," she said. "Usually 3 or 4 people. The instructor is good. Her name is Paulette." She paused. "People come for different reasons." He looked at her then, directly for the first time in all the weeks he'd been coming in. "Do they?" he said. "They do." He put his hands in his pockets and walked to the door. At the door he stopped. "Thank you," he said without turning around. "Tuesday at 7, she said. He left. The bell rang once. He came the following Thursday. Not Thursday, which Nora noted without considering what it meant, except that he'd had a day to think about it and had decided not to wait another week. She took that as information about the kind of man he was. The kind who once decided does not delay. She ran the desk. She did not go to the back room where the program was held. She could hear faintly the murmur of Paulette's voice and occasionally a response, and she let the sound of it be ordinary background, the way rain is ordinary background. And she shelved books and checked out returns and did not allow herself to calculate anything. He came back the following Tuesday at 6:15. He sat at his table. This time there was something in front of him on the table. A small notebook, spiral bound, the kind you buy at a gas station. He had a pencil. She could see from across the room that the pencil grip was effortful. The kind of grip you use when you haven't been doing it long. She didn't look. Here is something I have come to believe about attention, which is that most of us confuse it with approval. We think that if someone is watching us, they are judging us. We have been taught this, I think, by the particular way we are watched when we are failing. In school, at work, in the presence of people who need us to be more than we are. We learn to fear being seen at our worst, and so we come to fear being seen at all. What Nora Baine gave Silas Croft in those Tuesday evenings was not privacy. It was something more precise. It was attention without consequence. The knowledge that someone in the room was aware of him, not his gap, not his shame, not his particular difficulty, but him, the whole man. The one who drove the dark green truck and came in every week and was trying very quietly to become someone who could read. She never made it a project, never made it a kindness she needed him to receive in any particular way. She just kept the space around him clean, the way you keep a room ready for someone who might need it. His name was on the library card he eventually registered in January. Silas Croft. She'd found out a few things by then through the ordinary circulation of small-town information. He ran a cattle operation about 40 minutes east of town, on land his grandfather had broken. He'd been doing it alone for years. He had a reputation as a hard worker and a man of few words, which in the farming community around Lakewood was said with a kind of respect that didn't need elaboration. What she learned from her own observation was different from what the town knew. She noticed that he was careful with things. With his notebook, with the chair he sat in, with the door when he came and went. The gentleness in someone that large tends to be earned. It is the result of knowing your own capacity for disruption and deciding daily not to exercise it. She had seen that quality in a few people over the years and she trusted it. She noticed that he learned fast. Not because she was tracking his progress. She wasn't, but because by March the notebook on his table had been replaced by an actual book. A thin one. The kind of thing you might find in the children's section, though this one was not from the children's section. It was a collection of Louis Riel's letters. She had left it, face down again, on the reference shelf one evening in late February. Because it was short, and because it was about a man who had been both physically powerful and privately uncertain, and because it seemed like a book that might fit the shape of him. She wasn't sure he'd know who she was leaving things for. She wasn't sure it mattered. The book was gone from the shelf the following Tuesday. In April he spoke to her for the second time. She was turning off the lights in the periodicals section when she heard him behind her. "The letters," he said. "The real book." She turned around. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, which she had come to recognize as his posture when he was deciding how much to say. "I didn't know about him," she said. "Not really. I knew the name. Everyone knows the name. But I didn't. I hadn't." He stopped. "Read it," she said. "Read it," he agreed. There was a pause. "He wrote to his mother," Silas said. When things were going badly. He wrote letters that he knew she might not get in time. He wrote them anyway. Nora didn't say anything. "I thought that was." He shifted his weight. "I thought that was something." "It is something," she said. He nodded. He stood for another moment in that way he had, as though finishing a sentence internally. And then he put his hands back in his pockets and went to his table, and she turned off the rest of the lights in the way she always did, methodically, section by section, and did not treat the conversation as having been remarkable, though it had been. In May he began staying after the program ended. Paulette, the instructor, usually finished at 8:30. Nora had already locked the front door by then but left the side door open for the program participants. Silas had taken to sitting in the main part of the library after, in his usual spot for another half hour or so. He would be reading. She could see him reading now, tracking words with a focus that cost him something but that he paid without complaint. She worked at the desk during this time. There was always something to do. She had long ago stopped being surprised by how much there was always to do in a library. The cataloging, the mending of spines, the quiet bureaucracy of keeping a collection alive on a budget that hadn't increased since 2019. One evening in late May he came to the desk while she was mending a copy of The Stone Angel whose binding had come loose. He set a piece of paper on the desk. She looked at it. It was a note, written in block letters, the kind of printing that takes effort and produces something both deliberate and unsteady. She could see where the pencil had pressed hard and where it had lightened, could see the places where he had stopped and started again. It said, "I know you are the one who left the books. I wanted you to know I know. Thank you." She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at him. He was watching her with an expression that was not easy to name. It was not vulnerable, exactly. He was not a man who easily permitted that. It was something more like open, as though he had decided for this moment to be findable. "You're welcome," she said. He picked the note back up. She thought he was going to take it with him, and she felt something. She didn't examine too closely at the thought, but instead he folded it carefully and placed it back on the desk on her side. "Keep it," he said. "I wrote it twice. That one came out better." He went back to his table. She did not look at him for the rest of the evening. Because there are moments when you have been given something, and the best thing you can do with it is hold it carefully, and not turn it over too quickly in your hands. The summer passed in the way that prairie summers pass. Fast in feeling and long in light. The evening stretched out thin and gold in a way that made everything seem like it was still becoming something. He kept coming. She kept noticing. Neither of them remarked on the pattern they had built, which by July had become something she would have noticed the absence of way. You notice the absence of a sound you've grown accustomed to. He moved from the thin collection of letters to other books. A history of the Cypress Hills, a worn copy of Who Has Seen the Wind that she had mended twice, and thought about withdrawing from circulation, but hadn't been able to. A book about cattle management, which he checked out properly at the desk, and which she noted in the system without comment. When he returned Who Has Seen the Wind, he set it on the desk and tapped the cover once. "It should stay," he said. "I agree," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "It's the way he writes about the land," he said. "Like it knows something. Like it's paying attention," she said. "Yes." They were quiet for a moment. "That's what I think too," she said. And something in saying it out loud, to him specifically, felt like the completion of something she hadn't known was incomplete. In September, the library received a small grant for programming improvements, and Nora applied part of it to new shelving in the back room, which meant the literacy program was temporarily relocated to the main floor, which meant Silas's Tuesday evenings were rearranged, which meant, one evening, he was sitting not in the back corner but at a table in the middle of the room, closer to the desk. He did not seem to mind. She noticed, watching him read from a not significant distance, that he no longer tracked words with effort. The focus was still there, but it had become quieter. The way a skill becomes quiet when it has been internalized. When it stops being a performance of competence and starts being just a thing you do. She found she was glad for him in a way that was not complicated by anything else. Just glad. The clean, particular gladness of seeing someone become more of themselves. That evening when he came to the desk to check out his book, The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, which she'd placed face down on the end of the reference shelf 3 weeks ago, and which had appeared in his stack with the ease of something he'd found himself. He looked at her for a moment before she processed the card. "I've been thinking," he said, "about getting a library card somewhere else. Somewhere with more books." She looked up. "Regina," he said, "the main branch. I've been meaning to go, I thought." He stopped, adjusted. "I thought I might if you weren't using Saturday. There are offers that are not offers technically, that hold their meaning sideways so they can be declined without damage to either party." She had spent enough years reading things to know what she was reading. "I'm not using Saturday," she said. 8 o'clock, he said. "It's a 2-hour drive." "I'll bring coffee," she said. "I'll drive," he said. He picked up his book. He turned toward the door. "I do know the way," she said almost to herself, "to the main branch." "I expect you do," he said without turning around. "You can navigate." And then he was gone and the library was quiet, and the bell above the door rang once. Just once, because the wind that evening came from the south, not the north. And Nora Baine stood at the desk for a moment and felt the room around her. The shelves and the carpet and the groaning heat and the borrowed quiet of a Tuesday in September. She thought about what it is to be noticed. Not that the way we usually mean it. Not to be seen as impressive or beautiful or capable. To be noticed in the smaller, more irreducible way. The way someone knows which shelf you're standing at without looking. The way someone leaves something face down, because they understand that you may need to approach it sideways. The way a man who has spent a year becoming able to write something down chooses to write it to you. She thought about how rare that is. She turned off the lights in the periodicals section, and the reference section, and the back room with its new shelving. She locked the side door. She turned off the lamp on her desk last, as she always did, and stood for a moment in the dim before heading to the exit. The note was still there, folded on her side of the desk. She picked it up and put it in her coat pocket. She has it still. "So I'll ask you this, and I mean it plainly. Has anyone ever paid that kind of attention to you? Not to what you're good at, not to what you're working toward, but to the whole of you, the gap and the effort and the thing you carry quietly in your jacket, face down because you're not ready yet for it to be seen? Tell me in the comments. I think you'll find you're not as alone in that as you might believe."